If it sounds too good to be true, often it is. Is that a good way to sum up these special trust vehicles?
100%, mate. It's like a brochure wrapped in a boomerang. It's going to come back and smack you in the back of the head before you even realise it. And I think these sort of schemes have been around for a long time. Everyone thinks they're new, but they've actually been lurking in the background for quite some time, as you would know better than I. And for me, it's a bit like spraying yourself with steak sauce before you walk into the lion's den. Mike, it sounds adventurous, but you'd better be quick on your feet if you're really going to survive the inevitable issues that are going to come out of this once we get down the track.
Welcome to Get Invested on the Property Hub podcast channel, the leading weekly show for Australians who want to learn how to unlock their full self, health and wealth potential. I'm your host, Bushy Martin, and each week I go deep with the best investors, experts, leaders and founders to find out what it takes to break free from the grind, discover freedom and to live by design. Subscribe now and join me and get invested in the life that you really want. Let's get started.
Hi freedom fighters. I'm sure you've heard about the latest trick that supposedly gives you unlimited buying power. You know the one, set up a special trust and suddenly the banks go blind and can't see your debt. Sounds tempting, doesn't it? But here's the real question. Is it a financial breakthrough or just a fast track to future financial pain, stress and heartache? Because everywhere you look right now, someone's flogging a shiny shortcut. I keep hearing unlimited borrowing, banks can't see your debt, set up a trust and boom, you're financially free. Sounds like printing money, right? Well, I'll let you in on a home truth. It's more like basting yourself in blood and belly flopping into a shark tank. It looks brave until reality bites. So this week, I'm going to lift the lid on this to help you sift the facts from the fake news on this very popular topic in order to assist you make better, fully informed decisions based on the good, the bad and the downright ugly, as we reshare my recent chat with Mike Mortlock on the Geared for Growth podcast, because this one really matters. Mike and I deep dive into SPV Trusts, those so-called special purpose vehicles being hyped as the magic key to infinite borrowing capacity, so that you can keep borrowing your portfolio and growing it when the banks say that you're actually tapped out. But as you're about to hear, what looks like a shortcut can quickly become a very slippery slope. So to balance the books on the trust debate, we dig into the trust traps hiding behind the hype to reveal why unlimited borrowing is usually a misleading myth in a nice suit. We'll unpack the hidden covenants, reviews and personal guarantees that most spruikers skip over. We'll expose the risks that brokers and investors don't see until it's too late. And we'll let you know the truth about how few properties you actually need to create your version of financial freedom without the sleepless nights. Because in property, shortcuts are usually expensive long cuts in disguise. So we unpack what's really hiding under the bonnet and why unlimited often means until the music stops. We also explore the real role of trusts and when they do and don't make sense, and if you're actually suited to them, and how data can dazzle and deceive, remembering that data's like a bikini. What it reveals is suggestive, but what it conceals is vital. So we share the answers on who really benefits from these trust setups. Is it you or your accountant? We'll unveil the fine print that's the spruikers skip, and why patience, not panic, builds genuine financial freedom. Because the truth is, if you're chasing shortcuts in property, you're often stepping over dollars to pick up cents. So if you've ever thought, well, maybe I can outsmart the banks, well, this is your permission slip to pause, breathe, and get the full picture before the shortcut bites back and ends up cutting you short. So tune in, have a laugh, and find out how to build real wealth, the kind that lasts much longer than the latest loophole. So enjoy, and let's get invested.
Bushy Martin, thanks for joining me back on Geared for Growth.
Always love having a chat to you, mate. You bring out the best and the worst of me every time, so I'm sure today's going to be no different.
I'm actually, this might not surprise you, but I'm actually most proud of the worst that I bring out. I think anytime someone as polished as yourself goes on a tangent and gets themselves into a trouble thinking, should I have said that on air? Then I'm winning.
Well, look out. I think what we're going to talk about today, mate, is going to put me in the proverbial poop in spades. So let's see how we go.
Well, let's fire up your wet blanket setting, because this is actually a very exciting thing that I thought, gee, Bushy will love this, because it's sort of like printing money. But you've actually got some sensible things to say that maybe is going to upset a few people. The topic for today, we're really talking about this kind of new idea that we've seen in the last couple of years, and there are some proponents, there are some YouTube channels where people are talking about it, and that is the magic of essentially and ostensibly unlimited borrowing capacity through the use of these trusts. So, for example, you buy a couple of properties in your personal name, you fire up a trust, you max that one out. Instead of going, oh, I guess maybe the world's telling me that I've probably gone as fast and as hard as I can. No, we'll just fire up another one and we'll go forever. If it sounds too good to be true, often it is. Is that a good way to sum up these special trust vehicles?
100%, mate. It's like a brochure wrapped in a boomerang. It's going to come back and smack you in the back of the head before you even realise it. And I think these sort of schemes have been around for a long time. Everyone thinks they're new, but they've actually been lurking in the background for quite some time, as you would know better than I. And for me, it's a bit like spraying yourself with steak sauce before you walk into the lion's den. Mike, it sounds adventurous, but you'd better be quick on your feet if you're really going to survive the inevitable issues that are going to come out of this once we get down the track.
I suppose it's a bit like, journalists like to talk about the negative gearing loophole. I'm like, well, it's been written into tax legislation since about 1936. At what point is it not a loophole and just part of the kind of indentured situation that we have with tax in Australia? But let's talk about the philosophy of it, and ignoring some of the things like the tax position of a trust, the cost of setting up and administering the trust. What are people saying is actually possible with trusts?
Yeah, well, I guess the stating the bleeding obvious before we get into that, Mike, the old bum covering disclaimer. Before we get into it, everything that you and I are going to talk about today is really just general info. It's not financial advice in any way, shape or form. Yes, I can talk about residential lending and property, but I'm definitely not an accountant, a lawyer or a financial advisor. So anything that's legal, accounting, tax or financial planning, really need to go off and talk to those specialists and make sure that they're part of your elite team and that they are doing things that are specific to your needs and situation, mate. So I always got to mention that, as we both know. But when it comes to the exercise of, I'm sick of hearing it on podcasts, to be honest, this infinite borrowing power through special purpose vehicle. It sounds really sexy and exciting when you say it, which is really just a trust with the corporate trustee latched onto it. But it really is the way it's being presented. It's like strapping a turbocharger onto your credit card and calling it financial aerodynamics, which is scary for me. So if we talk about and let's call them SPV trusts, special purpose vehicle trusts, for the sake of the argument. It's really the way it's being promoted is it's sort of supposed to park your debt in a separate garage so the bank forgets the rest of your portfolio. But the translation of that really is that you're essentially putting your kids on stilts so the car insurer doesn't know that they're teenagers. And believe me, they're always going to find out. So I think there's some pretty scary stuff around that. If we sort of dig into that in a little bit more detail, because I think it's like everything. If it sounds sexy, it's the unforeseen consequences that flow out of it that are going to bite you in the backside. And you probably heard me say this before, Mike. It's not about if, but about when. It's always. My philosophy on everything has always been plan for the worst and then manage for the best. and you've got a good chance. So if we dig into SPV Trust, so to get into it specifically, it really is just a standalone company and a trust combo that buys the property where lenders go blind and suddenly get amnesia in relation to your personal debts and other asset commitments. The promises, as we've talked about, are unlimited borrowing capacity, bulletproofing asset protection, and some tax wizardry that's wound in there. But I think what people are forgetting is what's needed to make these work. That they can work, and for certain investors, they can be good, but it's a fairly select few. It's not for the all and sundry that podcast promoters and others trying to monetize FOMO are really getting their head into, Mike. So, this is where I want to get a little bit granular on this subject so people start to understand what it really means. Because if you actually want to make one of these SPVs work, where to make it work, it must be standalone. It must always be cash flow positive, and that's for the life of the property. Now, if we look at it in the context of current costs, then that generally means you're going to have to kick in a cash deposit of between 40 to 50% of a property, and then add another 6 to 10% for your stamps and legals and any other bits and pieces. So already you only got to have a rate rise or an issue on the property, and the lights are going to turn red on that. The interest rate buffer to model repayments, it's really got to be done at least 2% above the offered rate to make sure the property is going to continue to wash its face if something changes. And you've really got to very carefully monitor those standalone costs. You've virtually got to build a spreadsheet that you're looking at pretty regularly to look at all of the costs and income within that exercise moving forward. And let's face it, when you're doing a rental reality check, I'd always be using the lower of the current lease or an independent appraisal minus at least 2 to 4 weeks vacancy allowance to make sure you're not in strife. And you need to park 5 to 8% of gross rent in the trust buffer account to cover maintenance issues that are inevitably going to occur. So you add in the fact that, if you're borrowing in this exercise, which comes under commercial lending, commercial lenders are going to demand quarterly P&L reviews and formal account reviews every 12 months. And if anything changes when they do those reviews, that's when the house of cards can come down crashing pretty damn quickly. So some of the things that I think are probably worth expanding on, Mike, because and I see this not just with these types of property transactions, but general property transactions. People go in, and a lot of investors go in with a all good assumptions basis when the reality is very different. So some of those included the assumption that interest stays flat. Well, the reality is that commercial SPV loans are often variable and they are reviewed regularly. And they often reprice them based on how they see them. So they can wipe out the thin rental margins and put you in the red pretty quickly. The other assumption is that rents never fall and vacancies are nil. I see that all the time. So just a single 3-week vacancy or a 5% rate drop can break the lender's 1.25 times interest cover rule, which is part of the lending agreement. In terms of maintenance, the often assumption is, well, we'll just allocate 5% of rent to maintenance. Well, one roof replacement worth 20 grand is going to eat 2 years of your cash flow. And the other assumption is that there's no new taxes. Now, we're already seeing that state land tax thresholds are really tightening, and multiple trusts thresholds are jumping. So there's multiple fixed minimums that just keep rising. And then, of course, the assumption is that the banks leave the LVR and the covenants associated with these loans alone. Well, the reality is very different. Those reviews I talked about often result in forced principal and interest amortisation or a request for partial pay downs if the valuation soften, because they're revaluing these properties when they do this. So now the issue there is that once any of the loan covenants is breached, the loan is then technically in default. And even if you've made every payment on time without an issue, it gives the lender the ability to lift the margin, to require a cash top-up, so you've got to kick cash in, or they can actually call the debt in full. So there's quite a few potential issues on that front. And then if we look beyond that, one of the issues that I think people aren't thinking enough about is that, when lenders, the ATO or a court are able to look past the standalone SPV exercise, because it's pretty easy to pierce the veil. The look-through provisions that go beyond that are pretty strong. And what a lot of people don't realise is that virtually all the lenders still require personal guarantees when it comes to lending for these sorts of facilities, which automatically brings the director beneficiaries' assets and debts into play. So don't think that you've put a firewall there. Also, where there's multiple SPV trust arrangements that have the same guarantors, that lets the bank aggregate your serviceability. So that unlimited borrowing and unlimited purchasing power gets ruined pretty quickly. The ATO, they are able to actually look at related party loans or cash injections, and there's very strict rules and regulations around that. So, when if money's put in to top it up, if it's a below market interest loan from a shareholder or there's no formal terms, then you can be getting in the way of the Division 7A requirements, which have some pretty significant penalties. And there's a Part 4A anti-avoidance exercise. So if the commissioner feels that the sole purpose of the structure is to be shifting tax or hiding debt, then the commissioner can actually reconstruct the whole transaction. You can really be in the doodah. Then if we add in the fact that state revenue officers looking at land tax grouping rules allow the commission to aggregate the trusts that have the same controlling minds and then treat them as one taxpayer, then the whole stack of cards starts to fall out. And the other big risk here is that if you end up in a legal situation or your financial position doesn't end up going well, then if a director trades while insolvent or commingles funds, so they start topping up from sources not in the right way, then your asset protection is set aside under the Corporations Act,
Right.
Which really puts you in the breach as far as bankruptcy provisions are concerned. So there's a whole host of potential snakes and ladders in that exercise, Mike.
Well, I would consider the blanket suitably sodden, Bushy, with that whirlwind tour of special purpose vehicles. Trusts do have a place. Do you put sort of SPV trusts and family trusts in different categories? Are these special purpose vehicles a different thing fundamentally from, say, a family trust that you might set up if, let's say, you're a surgeon and you want to be able to protect your assets from being sued if that happens, or let's say you own a business and you want that in the family trust so that you can allocate dividends. Is that sort of different to these special purpose vehicles?
Yeah, I think in a nutshell, no. And again, I'm not an accountant, so I need to spell that out. But the only issue here is if an investor is intending to try and use the trust to give themselves unlimited borrowing capacity and unlimited purchasing power, that's where they run the risk. If you're not, and you're using a family trust, and I've done that myself, use a family trust, but you're not trying to get the lender to go blind. That's the difference here. They've been put up as, okay, just look at this, ignore it, put your blinkers on, ignore everything else that I might be doing and got my hands, fingers in. Just look at this on its merits to decide whether you're going to lend money to. That's where the risks start to creep in. So, good point, Mike. I'm not kiboshing trusts, because they can be very useful, particularly for asset protection and other things down the track. And as I say, I've used them myself. Where you've got properties you're going to hold long term and you want to actually have them as legacy properties for members of your family, they can become beneficiaries, and the property can, if you shuttle off the mortal coil, and the property automatically can transfer to them becoming trustees, and there's no stamp duty, there's no capital gains because there's no change of ownership. So there's some real merits in doing that. And as if it's just for a trust, a purchase that where you're not hiding the rest of your financial position, because that's effectively what you're doing, then they can be useful and they can be appropriate. So it's a matter of what the intent is here and what that means in terms of how the bank's looking at it. Because the thing that we really need to be clear on here is that when things slip up, and it's likely that they will, then that's when the banks start coming to recover their position. They're pretty good at doing it. So if they can't get it out of you, and that they'll chase your personal guarantees first, and then whatever assets they can get their hands on, they'll do that. But I think the bigger risk are residential brokers who mistakenly think that they can put people into this, because under the current best interest duty and other financial obligations under the financial services regulations, if we know what a borrower's full position is, and yet we are putting them into a bank where they do a commercial loan on a standalone, positively geared trust arrangement, and the wheels fall off and the bank can't recover it from the borrowers, they'll come after the broker. So
yeah, right.
And again, it's like any industry. Brokers are chasing the deal because they only get paid if they write a loan. Well, there'll be a lot of the piling into that, and you and I have seen a lot of them in podcasts talking about it. And the big winners in all of this, of course, are accountants, because they're writing their ticket. The significant costs in setting it up, more significant costs in administering the whole exercise on a regular basis. So a great meal ticket for the accountants, but just be aware of the risks. And that's, we all chase rewards, but if we don't know what the risks are and we haven't accommodated them, then we are walking a tightrope.
When we talk about lending in Australia, as you've elucidated to some degree, we have APRA, the Australian Prudential Regulation Authority. Banks are governed by the rules that APRA set. But banks have their own serviceability metrics as well. They can obviously go further. It kind of begs the question, if a bank has looked at you, Bushy, and said, you've got these properties in your portfolio, this is your income, we reckon you're a little bit tapped out. Now, is that an opportunity to go, a lot of machinations have happened to come into this position where a bank has said, I think the risk-reward ratio of you going further isn't there? Or is it just what people might say, a limited mindset? It's like, no, look, don't let them hold you back. Let's have a look at the next opportunity to push through this barrier, because that's the only way that you get anywhere.
Yeah, I think there's a combination, really, because I think the biggest issue we have right now is that people just don't have any patience. They want it all yesterday, and that's sprinkled with a big dose of FOMO that is continuously pushed from every level of media, whether it be mainstream media or even through podcasts. It's the fear of missing out exercise. Jump in now, you're going to miss out. So given that the rates have been up and borrowing capacity has been down, there's a lot of people, particularly those that have come into property since COVID, Mike. I mean, there's almost a new generation of property investors who've only seen great times with property prices rising. That's pretty much been their entire property experience. So it's very easy for them to get caught up and I've got to do it now. I've got to get 10 properties in 10 minutes. Otherwise, I'm going to miss out. And therefore, because they're capped out with the regular borrowing capacity, which affects their purchasing power, then they are forced to start looking, well, how else can I make this happen? And then in come the property Pied Pipers, which a smattering of accountants, buyers agents and others who are pushing these sort of schemes, but they don't talk a lot about the inherent risks that sit underneath that. So it's the old story, what's that famous Warren Buffett quote, wealth is a transfer of money from the impatient to the patient. Never been truer, I don't think.
And if you talk about patience, I mean, what a guy to sort of study. There's graphs you can look at online that chart his net worth over time. And really, until he gets into his late 70s, there's not much to report. Of course, he's a very wealthy person, but when you sort of see that uptick in the back end, like that just goes to show the power of compound returns, and obviously he's a very, very patient man and a very diligent investor that I think has always spent far less than he's ever made, to a point where now he probably spends less on a ratio basis to income than anyone else on the planet. So let's take a situation that I sort of was riffing on a little bit with you. So let's say you have a household income. Let's say it's $200,000 to $400,000 thereabouts. Somewhere in and around the average, or a little bit better for a property investor. You've got 5 or 6 investment properties. The bank has said, look, unless you triple your income or you get some sort of lotto winnings, you're pretty much tapped out for the next little while, unless we can see big valuations in the future on that portfolio. But you're kind of thinking, no, like, I'm not going to let that hold me back. I'm going to start a trust, a special purpose trust. What I suppose we've got to look at is the difference between the cost of you setting that up compared to, say, waiting to be able to revalue and go again. A couple of things that you shared. One is that the interest rate is likely to be different. The other one is that it has to be positively geared. And you were talking about defaulting on a loan can include you've paid every repayment, you've just defaulted on the terms rather than the payment, which is a different way to look at default. The cost of setting it up as well. How does somebody kind of model what the advantage is of being able to go, say, 2 years earlier than having the patience to wait for the next cycle to be able to revalue? The Geared for Growth Property Investing podcast is presented by our business, MCG Quantity Surveyors. If you're an investor or a property professional looking to get the best tax depreciation deductions for yourself or your clients, please get in touch with us at mcgqs.com.au. It's our mission to help as many property investors as we can to maximise their claims and maximise their property education as well.
Yeah, well, not easily is the easy answer, because you need to factor all of those additional cost imposts into the equation, and there's pretty good software out there that will enable you to have a look at that, but most people don't. And the question, I think, circling back on that, Mike, is why do you need to? How much is enough? So if someone's already got 4 or 5 properties and then they're tapped out, what that's telling me is they're trying to make it happen in 5 minutes, not what you and I know is that, to go through a full growth cycle, the average is 15 years. Now, if you go the 15 years, then you're going to replace your income over that period, and there's actually no need to be accumulating these. I get sick and tired of the biggest dickus exercise that I keep hearing on a number of podcasts, and it's all the bragging rights about how many properties you own. Well, I couldn't give a monkey's, to be honest. It's not the number of properties you own. In fact, the bigger the number, the bigger the headaches for most people, because you then got a full-time job managing the damn things. It's more about the quality of the asset. It's the value of the asset. It's the affordability of the asset in terms of, structuring in such a way that it's not burning a massive hole in your pocket while you hold on to it. And then bracing time as your friend, not as your foe. And I think this is the big issue for me, is that there is so much pressure on making it happen quickly and making it happen now that people are losing sight of the benefit of what we've just touched on, which is the Buffett style, eighth wonder of the world through compounding, and just getting the hell out of the way, and moving from, let's face it, if you buy a number of properties, and for most, I do this all the time now, Mike, 3 or 4 properties over 15 to 20 years is enough to generally create a nest egg that will fund a very comfortable lifestyle ongoing. So that's a gentle stroll in the park at conversation pace, mate. If we're starting to do that in under 10 years or between 5 and 10, suddenly we're climbing a cliff without a safety rope. And we're putting all sorts of pressure for what I don't know. And the stress and the headache that they're putting on themselves, and the sleep at night exercise that goes with it because of the risk that they're inheriting. Maybe I'm getting old and crusty, but it just doesn't make sense.
I think, I mean, that's probably just a tangential coincidence. You're old and crustiness. I just thought I'd fire you with both barrels just to see. I mean, I can never actually upset you. You just kind of laugh. But I feel very old and crusty. I feel like we're in the same boat. For people that are a little bit old and crusty, let's say we're 55 years old. We haven't necessarily been very smart with money. We don't want to be working at 67 and beyond. We've just got a couple of properties and we're having to wait, and we are jazzed up about going hard and fast now. Is there a step between, say, going to one of these vehicles that might be, and this is, of course, much more your area of expertise, let's say these second-tier lenders, is that where there's an opportunity to go, okay, well, I can't hide my debt. I can just work with somebody that has more of an appetite to lend. And, of course, there's a price to pay with that, with the interest rate. But presumably it's a lot cheaper exercise than setting up a trust.
Way cheaper. And, the reality is that across the 40-odd residential lenders and 2,000 different loan solutions that are out there, Mike, there's at least a 55% variation across them in terms of how much they'll let you borrow. Right. And that's a pretty significant shift. So a lot of people make the mistake of assuming all banks are the same, and most people, I mean, the good old CBA still swallows up the lion's share of all home loans in the country, and then between them and the 3 or 4 top tierers, that soaks up a big chunk of the rest. But if you look outside of that ring to a number of quite specialist lenders who have the appetite to be able to look after this without risk, and you don't have the risk, then you can significantly increase your borrowing capacity and your purchasing power pretty easily without the need to do something stupid or inherit those sorts of risky type of propositions. I mean, the other avenue that we keep hearing about now is, we'll just jump into set up a self-managed super fund and buy a property that way. And yes, that's an avenue. And yes, there are some significant benefits both during and after the exercise, because you're only paying 15% tax on inputs up until retirement age, and beyond retirement age, you can sell properties in a self-managed super fund with zero capital gains. So there's some issues there, and again, linking that back to what we're talking about, these SPVs. Well, SPVs, you've got to be very clear on your exit strategy with those, because if you intend to sell a property in SPV, you don't get the capital gains exemption. You pay full whack in a trust. So you're sort of robbing from Paul to pay Peter in a way in that context. So I think the question I always come back to is, how much is enough? How much is enough for you? And no one really sits down. Very few people that I come across sit down and work out, well, exactly how do we want to live and how much does that lifestyle cost? You'd probably be surprised that, 150, 200 grand is going to give you a very comfortable lifestyle a year when you're no longer working, and assuming you've paid off your home loan, which if you've set the structure up right, you will have done so. So I think while they're tempting, these sort of gimmicky, glittery concepts that have been talked about, then I would explore the more regular exercise like you've just suggested first, to see what your horsepower is before sort of taking the ball lolly and taking the big risk on some of these complex and costly exercises.
It does sort of beg the question. I wonder how many people that are tapped out on, say their mortgages with the big four go, okay, well, we want to set up this special purpose vehicle and blow past the idea of, okay, well, there's other lenders there that might look at me and go, yeah, well, you've still got a little bit of capacity, right? Like, I wonder how many people do you think make that step before they go to the full trust?
Quite a few. And the other thing, and again, I just want to emphasise this point, Mike. We utilise an indicative freedom indicator that ties together how much lifestyle income you need with your time horizon, and then project forward based on what your current assets are, which super, property, shares, crypto, whatever it might be, to look at what the end game is. And most people are pretty surprised when they realise that 3 or 4 properties over a 15+ year period is going to do the job. That will, for most people who are looking for a comfortable lifestyle, that's enough. But if you just carve 5 years off that and go from 15 to 10 years, the scale and size of assets you need to secure doubles.
Right.
So that the timeline, as we've touched on a couple of times here, is massive in terms of the likely outcome. So this is where I think the patience, persistence, and consistency muscles are the things that separate those who actually do achieve sustainable success in property, and that's about 5% of the investors out there. The rest allow their impatience to get in the way and go pursuing things way beyond what they're actually going to need, Mike, and inherit a whole bunch of risk in the meantime that is potentially going to shipwreck them before they get to the finishing line anyway.
One of the things that I like about marketing is you can have an idea, but the market will tell you whether it works or not, right? And I feel like, in a sense, people have to take responsibility for the stuff that's out there, because if it wasn't interesting to people, if it wasn't something that makes them feel like it's the shortcut, then no one would be talking about it, because nobody's making money about it, making money through it. But of course, as you mentioned before, with setting up these special purpose vehicles, accountants are making money, advisors are making money, brokers are making money, valuers are making money. There's a lot that kind of spins off of this. How much of this do you think is actually consumer driven, where the problem is that lack of patience, or perhaps this expectation that we have to be like this podcaster who says they've got 20 properties or 50 properties or hundreds of millions of dollars of net worth?
I think it's both. I think it's the artificial feeding frenzy that's created as much as I think the undertone to all of this, Mike, is that because we have become instant iPhone everything over the last few years, and therefore we just don't have any patience any longer. We want it all yesterday. And similarly with the property professionals, and I use that word professionals loosely when we're talking about some of the characters that are playing in this space, for them to build their business empires, these sort of hot chips and lollies that are being offered become pretty attractive. So I think it becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling exercise, because it's the Pied Pipers attract those that are in a hurry, and then if that gets enough airplay, that becomes the expectation of what others think they need to do.
Mm. For people that are playing at home, we've talked about the trusts, we've talked about self-managed super funds to some degree, and I've got some other episodes that people can dive in on that. But one thing that I wanted to unpack with you was some of the ways that data can be used, and you actually gave, it was either yourself or Terry Ryder, somebody gave me a quote that said, like, data will tell you whatever you want to know if you torture it long enough. Is that one of yours?
No, but I know the one, and it is a good one. The one I like to use is that data. Well, there's a couple actually that I think are relevant to what we're talking about here, and that is that in simple terms, that old quote that there are 3 kinds of lies, damn lies, and data is one of them. The other one that I like is that a lot of people use data like a lamppost. A drunk using a lamppost, more for support than illumination. And I think there's another good one that's just as applicable, and probably more so these days, and that is data's like a bikini. What they reveal is suggestive, but what they actually conceal is vital. So I guess my concern there, Mike, is that post-justifying data, there is a lot of that around now. You can get data to tell any story if you get creative enough about it. People are burying people in deluges of data, which, because we're in a world where we don't trust anyone, then if it's in numbers, it must be right. So it has an inbuilt bias to data being giving you that sense of comfort that, okay, well, the data says so, it must be right. But property data in itself really, at least misleading, at worst, well, it's almost criminal what some of the data does, because people are using the wrong data to draw the inappropriate conclusions, and often that it's measuring stuff that doesn't matter. And the stuff that does matter doesn't get measured at all. So I think we are definitely in a world where I think I've always said that property is an art and a science. There's way too much weight put on the science, which is, if you can't measure it, then it can't be true. I don't think that's right at all. I think the art, intuitive side of property, which are because let's face it, property in Australia is an emotionally driven asset. 70% of property buyers are buying with their heart, not their head. So if we're not getting our head around the emotional aspects and then weaving that into the decisions that we make, then we're missing out on a big chunk of the opportunity. Conversely, if we're buying a property because of the days on market, then I think we're missing the point. I really think we're on the wrong track when we're burying ourselves when deluges of this stuff.
I was going to ask you about a couple of metrics, and days on market was one of them. There's a lot I hear about metrics and data points like days on market or vendor discounting, those sorts of things that seem to be really flash in the pan stuff. I think from a data perspective, data is very good at predicting the next 3 to 6 months, but if we're talking about, a patient investor, a get rich slow philosophy, the days on market and the vendor discounting, it kind of doesn't matter anywhere near as much as a number of other different data points. And if we think about things that are hard to get data on, that might be the health of the local economy, whether job ads are increasing or decreasing in a local area, what is the pipeline for infrastructure development for that LGA, what are some of the major development control plans that might be under review that speak to density or potentially new housing developments. Those are all things that true property forecasters, and there's a couple in Australia, do very, very well. And that's where I think the art part of it comes in. Anyone can go on a platform and go, I want to find a property under 600 grand with days on market under 45 days and vendor discounting less than 3%. But there's actually a lot of danger in those filters, right? And the filters are focused on that short-term horizon. I'm keen to hear your thoughts on that and anything else that you kind of think can be very bewitching for the people that are new to property investing and do have that bias that if it's in numbers, well, that's got to be there for a reason.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the couple of things there. Firstly, I think investors who sustainably do well look through the front windscreen, not through the rearview mirror. So they are looking at an area and an opportunity based on what it's actually going to be like in 10 to 15 years or more. And they're not as measurable or finite metrics that like the ones we've just spoken about, but council and state planning records on zoning and rezoning, where the infrastructure is going to go, looking at the future lifestyles that people enjoy. I think, one thing that isn't measured much, which does have a major impact, is the fact that all of us we're about lifestyle these days. And with AI and everything else starting to impact on what we can do and where we can do it and how quickly we can do it, while we saw a taste of it during COVID, where there was this decentralisation to the regions, I think underpinning all of that, and again, I'm a classic example of that, mate. I'm talking to you today from East Gippsland in a beautiful spot called Lakes Entrance, which is just a hidden secret. I think, I travel a lot and move around the country taste testing different destinations. The lifestyle components of this location here and the ability to do anything, anywhere, anytime because technology is enabling me to do that. Well, there's a growing horde of people who are choosing lifestyle over CBDs because they can still interact and do what they need to do. Yes, there's been a lot of poo-poo of that exercise in recent times and the old return to the office and that whole routine. But again, be wary of who is sending that signal, because I always have a look at what's the interest of the person sharing the information to decide whether it's truly objective or transparent, and quite often not. But it really is a matter of focusing on what I call the three I's. Mike, I've probably spoken to you about this before, and that is new committed infrastructure, roads, rail, technology. It's new and growing industry diversity, because the industries bring the jobs, and then the strong and growing income demographics associated with that, overlaid with an area that has really good lifestyle amenity. They are the things that I focus on. What I don't focus on is median prices, days on market, auction rates. Yes, they'll be all right to look at the very pointy end when I'm right down to when I've already gone from top down to go from area to location to suburb to street. Then I'll have a look at that. But even then, I'll be relying pretty heavily on the intimate local knowledge of someone like a property manager who lives and breathes that location. And what never gets measured is local perception of a particular area. And that's generational. So, I've been laughing on the inside recently. I know Adelaide particularly well. I've spent a lot of time there. A lot of buyers agents pushing areas out north of the city in what there's still war zones in some locations, but the numbers look great. The yields are good, the price points are good, the days on market are fantastic. All of the normal numbers that people are using to make these decisions are ticking the boxes, but no one wants to live there. The only people who live in those locations are ones who can't live anywhere else. And locals, there's generational embedded sentiment about that area that would never touch those locations. Now, it's the quality stuff rather than the quantitative stuff that ultimately moves the needle in relation to future opportunity. I think a lot of people have been sold the dummy on some of that stuff because they have been looked at the affordability piece of those, and then they've been buried with these very short-term data metrics that again can be shaped to tell any story, and that they can look compelling. But if those forward projecting three I's aren't in play, the rest is going to be meaningless down the track.
That's a good point, isn't it? Because I think we're getting to the point, or we're past the point, where buyers agents, some of them have gotten to a size, and if you add a few of the followers and the clingers on, we now have enough firepower to manipulate markets just by the sheer volume coming in. But it's investor influence, but long-term growth requires owner-occupier investment as well, because that's the majority of the transactions in Australia. And with it being just investment, we get markets, I think, like Perth to some degree, Darwin to perhaps a bigger degree. It begs the question, okay, well, there's no disputing that Darwin is kicking goals, and in CoreLogic's next few months, I expect it to print some staggering numbers, but it's like, well, what is actually behind it? And without the sort of the local lifestyle draws, without it being an aspirational upgrader location for people that have their first home, that it's really just kind of a breeze that puffs through and doesn't last, right?
Totally, and this works beautifully for those property pipe pipers that I keep talking about, because they can get their own followers to compete with themselves using the post-justification data that the buyer's agent's using to build up prices very quickly and shortly in a identified location. And that makes the buyer's agent look good, because they can say, well, look, see. But I'm not sure whether we've spoken about this before, but I was talking to a property manager in far north Queensland, and I won't say which location, because I get a lot more truth from property managers than other players in the space. And they said, yeah, hey, our phone's been running off the hook. Someone talked about us on a podcast last week, and I've had 50 investors ringing us, all asking the same questions, all looking for the same sort of properties. Wow. Competing with each other to push the prices up. So we have moved to, we're very much like the equities market. You know, what I've always loved about property is it's an imperfect market. Every property in every street and every suburb is different to every other one. But because of the influx of information and the ability to share that information en masse, we've now got to a stage where players with big audiences are moving markets. They are becoming market movers, and the danger there is that they'll put the crosshairs on a location, and then there'll be the feeding frenzy of piranhas will dive in to push the prices up. Then when that gets a little bit sticky, then they'll just shift the crosshairs to another location. So we're going to see this sort of like Darwin. The fundamentals of Darwin just, you know, I used to live in the Territory for many years, so I know Darwin and Alice Springs extremely well. The fundamentals for long-term growth just aren't there. They're just not there. They're you know, breezes, not sustainable winds in that context, Mike. So I think people need to be looking beyond the exercise, and they need to triangulate information and cross-check information, and then look at the right information before they're making property decisions. But I've always looked at, when I bought a property, I'm thinking about who am I going to sell it to? Because if you're thinking you're going to sell that property in 15 years' time and you want to be selling it to an owner-occupier, then what do people think of the area? What do people think of the street? Does it have the street appeal for an owner-occupier? Does it have the owner-occupier appeal, or can I do some simple things to it that are going to create that owner-occupier appeal without spending a fortune making that happen? If I'm not answering those questions, but I'm just focusing on the current metrics that really don't give me any of that qualitative exercise, then I'm really painting myself into a corner. Yeah. And someone just agreed.
There you go. Well, we were talking off air that there was a risk that this podcast was just going to come across as two grumpy old buggers who want to say, well, everything that's fun and exciting, you know, is going to kill you. But look, I really feel like we have reached a position where there's so much noise and there's so many people promising certain things, but not necessarily giving the full picture. I think we've done that to a degree in the back end of this show, and the focus for the show was looking at these, you know, special purpose vehicles. We're not sort of saying, we're certainly not giving any financial advice to say whether you should or you shouldn't. But if you are considering that, you do need to understand the terms of the loan, the terms of the agreement, the extra costs, and go through that process of modeling it out. Because I know that you and I really just kind of care about the consumer. We don't want anyone to get into a position where they regret, or where they're forced into a position to sell, and the numbers are still saying those. I think the latest ATO stats are saying that 68% of investors buy one property, whereas it was 72%. It's getting better, but it's still a massive number, and I think that we both agree it's because people are still making mistakes, right?
Totally, and there's a lot of accidental investors in there who just move out of their house and turn it into a rental property. So I think there's a lot of that. I think one of the thoughts that I want to leave with everyone is that opinions and forecasts are like belly buttons. We've all got one, but most are full of fluff. So I think we need to, I just think we need to drill it down a little bit deeper, Mike. And if you're going to be spending hundreds of thousands on a property, then make sure you're looking at the right things and listening to the right people, and always question what is the agenda of the person who's talking about that message. Because if they stand to gain from it, there's a good chance that they're pushing it for that reason, not for your benefit. For me, it's all about making sure that you're making good, sound decisions based on a number of different data points and a number of different decision makers that are ultimately aligning with what your end game looks like. And again, not many people are clear about what that looks like either. So that's part of the problem.
Absolutely true. And sagely advice as always, Bushy. So thanks very much for coming back on the show. We appreciate it.
Love talking to you, mate. And I think you succeeded in bringing the worst out of me, mate. So congratulations.
Excellent. Mission accomplished. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to Get Invested on the Property Hub podcast channel, your home for property investment insights and inspiration. Make sure you subscribe to Property Hub for free. Get your weekly dose of Get Invested inspiration along with every episode of Realty Talk, Australia's top online property show for red-hot property investing news and insights direct from industry leaders and influencers. And finally, I'll see you next time.